My sister anonymously reported false ethics violations that got me dismissed from my surgical residency. Then her child was born with a heart defect only the pediatric cardiac surgeon I became could repair. I was in the operating room assisting Dr. Kimberly Rao on a coronary bypass when my pager went off with a 911 code from the program director's office. Dr. Rao glanced at me and nodded toward the door. I scrubbed out and practically ran to Dr. Leonard Fisher's office, my mind racing through possibilities. A family emergency, a patient complication from yesterday's surgery, anything except what was actually waiting for me. Fisher sat behind his desk with two people I'd never seen before, a man and woman in business attire with briefcases. He gestured to the empty chair. His face was granite. Dr. Olivia Brennan, this is Margaret Howe and Thomas Kirkland from the hospital's Ethics Compliance Division. We've received a formal complaint regarding your conduct with patients. My stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? Margaret opened a folder and slid several documents across the desk. An anonymous report was filed 3 days ago detailing multiple instances of alleged patient mistreatment, falsification of medical records, and inappropriate boundary violations with patients under your care. The complaints span the last 6 months of your residency. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking as I read the allegations. Patient A reported. I'd dismissed her pain concerns and altered her chart to hide a medication error. Patient B claimed I'd made inappropriate comments about her weight during examination. Patient C alleged I'd been intoxicated while on call. Patient D said I'd violated privacy by discussing his case with unauthorized personnel. None of it was true. Not a single word. This is completely fabricated, I said. I've never done any of these things. Who made this complaint? Thomas spoke for the first time. The report was anonymous, submitted through our confidential ethics hotline. However, it included specific patient names, dates, and chart numbers. We're obligated to investigate thoroughly. Fisher leaned forward. Dr. Brennan, you're suspended from all clinical duties effective immediately pending the outcome of this investigation. You'll surrender your hospital ID and pager. You're not to contact any patients or staff involved in this matter. I felt the room tilting. You're suspending me without even investigating whether these allegations are true? I have rights. I can explain every single one of these cases. Margaret's expression was sympathetic but firm. The suspension is standard protocol for ethics violations of this severity. The investigation will take approximately 4 to 6 weeks. If the allegations are substantiated, your residency will be terminated and the matter will be referred to the state medical board. If they're not substantiated, you'll be reinstated with full back pay. I wanted to scream that this was insane, that someone was lying, that my entire career was being destroyed based on anonymous accusations. But I also knew hospital politics. Once you were accused, the stain never fully disappeared. Even if cleared, I'd be the resident who'd been investigated for ethics violations. Other residents would whisper. Attendings would watch me differently. My reputation was already damaged beyond repair. I handed over my ID and pager and walked out of Fisher's office in a daze. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get my locker open. I finally managed to grab my bag and left through the back exit, not wanting to face anyone who might ask why I was leaving in the middle of a shift. I sat in my car in the parking garage and called my parents. My mother answered on the second ring. I told her everything, my voice breaking as I described the allegations. She was silent for a long moment. Olivia, are any of these things true? The question hit me harder than Fisher's suspension. My own mother was asking if I'd abused patients. No, Mom, none of it happened. Someone fabricated this entire thing. I don't know who or why, but I would never hurt a patient. You know me, she sighed. I know you're under a lot of stress. Residency is difficult. Maybe you made mistakes you don't remember clearly. Maybe you need to take some time off. I hung up. My mother didn't believe me. My own mother thought I was capable of falsifying records and mistreating patients. I drove home to the apartment I shared with my roommate, another resident who worked different hours. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall until it got dark outside. My phone buzzed with a text from my older sister, Natalie. Heard you got suspended. What did you do? Not what happened or are you okay, but what did you do? My sister, who'd gone to law school and was now a successful corporate attorney, had already decided I was guilty. I didn't respond. Over the next 4 weeks, the investigation consumed my life. I met with Margaret and Thomas 6 times, each meeting more degrading than the last. They asked me to walk through my typical day, describe my relationships with attending physicians, explain my documentation practices, detail any conflicts with staff or patients. They interviewed the patients named in the complaint. Patient A insisted I dismissed her pain and changed her records. I pulled up the actual charts and showed them every entry was timestamped and included pain assessments. The timestamps proved I couldn't have altered anything after the fact. They said the patient seemed very credible. Patient B maintained I'd made comments about her weight. I showed them the standardized intake form where I documented her BMI per protocol, nothing more. They said perception mattered more than intent. Patient C swore he'd smelled alcohol on my breath during a night shift. I offered to take a drug and alcohol test immediately. They said it was too late now to prove anything. Patient D claimed I'd discussed his HIV status with someone outside the care team. I provided logs showing every person who'd accessed his chart, all authorized. They said maybe I'd discussed it verbally where I couldn't be tracked. Every piece of evidence I provided was dismissed or reframed. The investigation wasn't searching for truth. It was building a case to justify the suspension. By week 3, I realized I was going to lose my residency regardless of the facts. Margaret called me in for a final meeting. Dr. Brennan, while we couldn't definitively prove all allegations, the pattern of patient complaints and the specific details provided raised serious concerns about your clinical judgment and professional conduct. The hospital has decided to terminate your residency effective immediately. You may reapply to residency programs elsewhere, but this dismissal will be noted on your record. I sat there absorbing the death of everything I'd worked for. 8 years of college and medical school, 3 years of surgical residency, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, 15-hour days, sleepless nights, missed holidays, sacrificed relationships. All of it gone because someone had filed an anonymous complaint with fabricated allegations, and the hospital had chosen to believe lies over my documented record. This is wrong, I said. Someone set me up. Someone made this up to destroy my career. Thomas closed his folder. Dr. Brennan, I understand you're upset, but making accusations about conspiracy theories won't help your case. Take responsibility for your actions, learn from this experience, and perhaps you can rebuild your career elsewhere. I walked out of that meeting knowing I'd been expertly destroyed by someone who understood exactly how the system worked. The allegations were specific enough to sound credible, but vague enough to be impossible to definitively disprove. The anonymous nature of the complaint protected the accuser from any accountability. The hospital's investigation process was designed to cover liability, not find truth. And now my career was over before it had really begun. I spent 2 weeks in my apartment not showering, barely eating, scrolling through job postings for positions that didn't require a completed residency: medical assistant, clinic coordinator, research assistant, all jobs I was overqualified for but now couldn't get anything better. My student loan payments were $2,400 a month. My savings would cover maybe 3 months. I needed to find work immediately. I applied to 40 positions, got 3 interviews. 2 places said my qualifications were too advanced for the role, and they were concerned I'd leave as soon as something better came along. The 3rd place hired me as a medical assistant at a family practice clinic for $18 an hour. I'd been making $60,000 as a resident. Now I was making $37,000 and taking blood pressures and filing paperwork. My colleagues were medical assistants with 2-year certificates who looked at me strangely when they learned I'd gone to medical school. One of them asked why I wasn't finishing my residency. I said it was complicated. The gossip started within a week. Someone had looked me up online and found a brief mention of my residency termination in a medical licensing database. The rumor spread that I'd been fired for being drunk at work. Then it changed to I'd killed a patient through negligence. Then it became I'd stolen drugs. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter once the gossip machine started. I worked at that clinic for 8 months, coming home every day wanting to quit medicine entirely. My sister Natalie called occasionally, asking how I was doing in a tone that suggested she already knew I was failing. She'd gotten married the previous year to Derek Sutton, a hedge fund manager, and was pregnant. She talked about nursery colors and baby names while I struggled to pay rent. You should apply to residency programs again, she said during one call. Just because one place didn't work out doesn't mean you should give up. One place didn't work out. She made it sound like I'd failed a test, not been systematically destroyed by false accusations. I was terminated for ethics violations, I said. No program will touch me with that on my record. She sighed. Maybe if you'd been more careful with your patient interactions, this wouldn't have happened. You were always so intense, Olivia. Sometimes that comes across wrong. I hung up on her. My own sister thought I'd brought this on myself through being too intense. After 8 months at the clinic, I applied to residency programs again. I was honest in my applications about the termination, framing it as a misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by hospital politics. I applied to 30 programs, got 0 interviews. The termination was a permanent black mark. No program director wanted to take a risk on someone who'd been dismissed for ethics violations, regardless of the explanation. I was functionally blacklisted from ever becoming a surgeon. I spent another year working at the clinic, then heard about a pathway for dismissed residents to rehabilitate their careers through demonstrating renewed competency. It required working under direct supervision for 2 years, completing additional ethics training, and getting recommendations from current physicians. I talked to Dr. Rao, my former attending who'd been in the operating room when I got suspended. She agreed to supervise me in a research position at a different hospital. The position paid $45,000 and was technically non-clinical, but it got me back into a medical environment and gave me a chance to prove I was competent and ethical. I worked under Dr. Rao for 3 years, co-authoring papers, assisting with research protocols, and slowly rebuilding my reputation. She wrote me recommendation letters for residency applications. This time I applied only to pediatric programs, figuring a fresh specialty might give me better chances than general surgery. I got 3 interviews. One program in Milwaukee offered me a spot in their pediatric surgery residency. It was a lower-tier program, not as prestigious as where I'd been before, but it was a chance to finish training. I accepted immediately and moved to Milwaukee at age 32, 6 years after my original residency had been terminated. I was the oldest first-year resident by almost a decade. The younger residents asked why I'd started so late. I said I'd taken time off for research. The partial truth was easier than explaining the full story. Pediatric surgery residency was 7 years of brutal training. I worked harder than anyone else, taking extra call shifts, volunteering for complex cases, studying every night until I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was determined to be so competent that no one could ever question my abilities or ethics again. I developed an interest in pediatric cardiac surgery, the most complex subspecialty within pediatric surgery. Only a handful of surgeons in the country specialized in certain rare congenital heart defects. I sought out every cardiac case I could, learned from the attending cardiac surgeons, read everything published on the subject. By my 5th year, I was the go-to resident for complex cardiac repairs. Dr. Rao, who'd moved to a hospital in Boston, called me during my 6th year. "Olivia, there's an opening for a pediatric cardiac surgery fellowship here. It's one of the best programs in the country. I want to recommend you." The fellowship was 2 additional years after residency, but it would make me one of the most qualified pediatric cardiac surgeons in my generation. I applied and got the position based on Dr. Rao's recommendation and my surgical track record. I moved to Boston and spent 2 years learning to repair heart defects most surgeons would never encounter. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, tetralogy of Fallot, transposition of the great arteries, complex cases where a millimeter error meant the child died on the table. I thrived under that pressure, finding that the technical precision required for cardiac surgery suited my personality. I finished the fellowship at age 41, 15 years after my residency had been terminated. I got offered a position as an attending pediatric cardiac surgeon at Boston Children's Hospital, one of the top pediatric hospitals in the world. I accepted, and finally, after everything, I'd rebuilt my career. I was the surgeon I'd always wanted to be, just through a much longer and more painful path than I'd expected. My sister Natalie lived in Connecticut with Derek and their daughter Stella, born while I'd been in residency. We saw each other at family holidays but weren't close. She'd become distant over the years, always busy with her legal career and family. I'd mostly let go of the resentment about her comments after my termination. She'd been thoughtless, but I'd survived despite her lack of support. I was in my office reviewing scans for an upcoming surgery when my phone rang with a Connecticut number I didn't recognize. I answered, and a woman's voice said, "Dr. Brennan? This is Dr. Angela Ortiz from Yale New Haven Children's Hospital. I'm a pediatric cardiologist, and I have a patient who needs your expertise." She explained that she was treating a 6-year-old girl with a complex form of hypoplastic left heart syndrome that had failed previous repairs. The child needed a highly specialized revision surgery that only a few surgeons in the country could perform. Dr. Ortiz had reviewed the literature and my published cases. She believed I was the best option for this particular defect. "What's the patient's name?" I asked. "Stella Sutton." I felt my entire body go cold. "Can you repeat that?" "Stella Sutton, age 6, multiple previous cardiac surgeries, currently in compensated heart failure. Her parents are very concerned. They've been told by other surgeons that she's inoperable." My sister's daughter. Natalie's child had the exact heart defect I'd spent the last decade learning to repair. The odds of this were astronomical. "Dr. Ortiz, I need to disclose something. Stella Sutton is my niece. Her mother is my sister." There was a pause. "Oh, I wasn't aware of the family connection. Does that change your willingness to take the case?" I thought about the last 15 years, the false accusations, the destroyed career, the years of rebuilding from nothing, my sister's dismissive comments about my intensity, and her suggestion that I'd brought the termination on myself. And now her daughter's life depended on the surgeon I'd become despite everything. "I need to review her full medical history and imaging before I can determine if the surgery is feasible," I said. "Can you send me everything?" Dr. Ortiz sent the files within an hour. I spent the rest of the day reviewing Stella's case. She'd been born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition where the left side of the heart is severely underdeveloped. She'd undergone the standard 3-stage surgical repair as an infant, but the 3rd stage had failed. Now at age 6, her heart was failing, and she needed a complex revision that would essentially rebuild her circulation. The surgery had maybe a 60% success rate even in the best hands. Without it, Stella would die within months. I could do the surgery. I'd done similar cases 3 times in the last year, and all 3 children were alive and doing well. The technique required extreme precision and an understanding of the specific anatomy that came from years of focused experience. Most pediatric cardiac surgeons would refuse the case as too high risk. I was probably the only surgeon in the region who would attempt it. I called Dr. Ortiz back. "I can do the surgery. I'll need her transferred to Boston Children's for the procedure. Have the parents contact my office to schedule a consultation." The next day, my assistant told me that Stella Sutton's parents had called to schedule a consultation for Monday. I confirmed the appointment and spent the weekend preparing, reviewing similar cases, mentally rehearsing every step of the procedure. Monday morning, my assistant called my office. "Dr. Brennan, the Sutton family is here." I walked to the consultation room and opened the door. Natalie sat in one of the chairs, looking thinner than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes. Her husband Derek sat beside her. Between them in a wheelchair sat a small girl with pale skin and oxygen tubes in her nose. Stella looked at me with curious eyes. Natalie's face went through several expressions when she saw me: confusion, recognition, shock, and then something that might have been fear. "Olivia," she said, "you're the surgeon?" I sat down across from them and pulled up Stella's scans on the computer screen. "Yes, Dr. Ortiz referred Stella to me because I specialize in complex hypoplastic left heart revisions. I've reviewed her case extensively. The surgery is high risk, but it's also her only option." Derek leaned forward. "We were told you're one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country for this specific condition. We're grateful you'll take her case." Natalie was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I turned to Stella. "Hi, Stella. I'm Dr. Brennan. Can you tell me how you've been feeling lately?" She spoke softly, her voice a little breathless. "I get tired a lot. I can't play outside with my friends anymore." I spent the next hour explaining the surgery in terms Stella could understand and giving Natalie and Derek the detailed medical explanation. The procedure would take 8 to 10 hours. Stella would need to be on bypass machine. I'd essentially reconstruct part of her heart's circulation pathway using synthetic materials and her own tissue. The risks included death on the table, stroke, organ failure, bleeding, and infection. The success rate was about 60%. Derek asked technical questions about my experience and outcomes. I answered honestly. I'd done this exact revision 3 times. All 3 patients survived. 2 were doing excellently. 1 had complications but was stable. Natalie hadn't spoken since her initial shock at seeing me. Finally, she said, "Can we have a moment alone to discuss this?" I stepped out of the room and went back to my office. 20 minutes later, my assistant buzzed me. "The Suttons would like to speak with you again." I returned to the consultation room. Derek said, "We'd like to proceed with the surgery. When can we schedule it?" I checked my surgical calendar. "I can schedule her for Thursday of next week. She'll need to be admitted Wednesday for pre-op. The surgery will likely take most of the day Thursday. She'll be in the cardiac ICU for at least a week afterward, then on the floor for another week if everything goes well." We scheduled everything, and they left with packets of information about the procedure and what to expect. Natalie still hadn't said anything beyond that initial question about discussing it privately. I didn't hear from Natalie until Wednesday evening. Stella had been admitted that afternoon for pre-op preparation. I was reviewing her labs when my office phone rang. Natalie's voice was tight. "Olivia, I need to talk to you. Can you come to Stella's room?" I went to the pediatric cardiac unit. Stella was asleep in her bed, monitors beeping softly. Natalie stood by the window. Derek wasn't there. "Where's your husband?" I asked. "He went to get dinner. I wanted to talk to you alone." She turned to face me. "Why didn't you tell me you were a pediatric cardiac surgeon?" "We haven't exactly been close," I said. "I didn't think you cared about my career after what happened." Her face flushed. "That's not fair. I was supportive when you got dismissed." "You asked what I did. You suggested I'd brought it on myself by being too intense. You told me to take responsibility. That's not support, Natalie." She looked away. "I was trying to help you see how you might have come across to people. I didn't think you'd actually done anything wrong. You called it a misunderstanding that I should take responsibility for. That's the same as saying you thought I was guilty." We were silent for a moment. Natalie's voice was quiet when she spoke again. "I'm terrified, Olivia. Stella is dying. Every surgeon we've consulted said she's inoperable. Then Dr. Ortiz said there's this surgeon in Boston who might be able to help, and it turns out to be you." "And that makes you uncomfortable," I said. "Having your sister operate on your daughter after you didn't support her when her career was destroyed? It makes me feel like I don't know you anymore. The Olivia I knew 15 years ago was a surgical resident. Now you're this renowned specialist that other doctors refer impossible cases to. When did that happen?" I thought about the last 15 years, the humiliation of working as a medical assistant, the years rebuilding my reputation, the brutal residency and fellowship training, the hundreds of hours studying cardiac defects. All of it had been necessary to become the surgeon who could save Stella's life. "It happened slowly," I said, "after I lost everything and had to rebuild from scratch." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I didn't believe you were set up. I should have supported you better." The apology was 15 years too late, but it was something. "Natalie, I'm going to operate on Stella tomorrow regardless of our history. She's a 6-year-old child who needs surgery, and I'm qualified to do it. That's all that matters." "But you must hate me. You must resent having to save my daughter after how I treated you." I looked at Stella sleeping in her bed, small and fragile with tubes and wires connecting her to machines. "I don't hate you, and I don't resent Stella. She's an innocent child who deserves every chance at life. Whatever happened between us doesn't change my responsibility as her surgeon." Natalie wiped her eyes. "Thank you for taking her case, for being willing to help despite everything." I left her room and went home to get a few hours of sleep before the surgery. I lay in bed thinking about the strange path my life had taken, the false accusations that destroyed my first residency, the years of rebuilding, the decision to specialize in pediatric cardiac surgery. All of it had led to this moment where my sister's daughter needed the exact expertise I'd developed. If I'd completed my original surgical residency, I probably would have become a general surgeon. I never would have specialized in pediatric cardiac surgery. I never would have learned to repair complex congenital heart defects. Stella would have been out of options. The false ethics complaint that destroyed my career had somehow created the surgeon who could save her life. The irony was almost unbearable. Thursday morning at 6, I scrubbed in for Stella's surgery. My surgical team was ready. The perfusionist who'd run the bypass machine, the cardiac anesthesiologist, 2 surgical residents, the OR nurse. Everyone in that room was there because Stella needed the most skilled team possible. I made the initial incision and began the careful work of accessing her heart. The previous surgeries had left scar tissue that made everything more complicated. Each layer required precise dissection to avoid damaging the vessels and structures underneath. 2 hours in, we had her on bypass and I could see the full extent of the problem. The previous repair had failed because the synthetic conduit used in her 3rd surgery had developed severe stenosis. It was completely blocked. Her circulation was being maintained by collateral vessels that had developed naturally, but they couldn't sustain her for much longer. I spent the next 4 hours carefully reconstructing her circulation pathway, using a combination of synthetic grafts and her own tissue to create a new route for blood flow. Every stitch had to be perfect. Every connection had to be precise. One error meant she'd bleed out or stroke or her heart would fail. The residents watched in silence as I worked. This was the kind of surgery most of them would never perform, even as attending surgeons. It required years of specialized training and experience with these specific defects. 6 hours into the surgery, I'd completed the reconstruction. We took her off bypass carefully, watching as her heart took over circulation through the new pathway. It worked. Blood flowed through the grafts smoothly. Her oxygen saturation improved immediately. Heart rate stabilized. We monitored her for another hour to ensure everything remained stable, then closed her chest. The surgery had taken 8 hours total. I was exhausted but satisfied. Stella had come through it. Now we had to see if she'd recover without complications. I went to the waiting room where Natalie and Derek had been sitting all day. They stood when they saw me. "The surgery went well," I said. "I was able to complete the repair. She's in the cardiac ICU now. The next 48 hours are critical. We need to make sure there's no bleeding or clots, that the new pathway continues to function properly, and that her other organs handle the improved circulation." Derek shook my hand. "Thank you, Dr. Brennan. Thank you for saving our daughter." Natalie just looked at me with an expression of overwhelming gratitude and something else. Guilt, maybe. Understanding of what I'd become. Over the next week, Stella recovered better than I'd hoped. No complications. The new circulation pathway worked perfectly. Her oxygen levels were the best they'd been in years. She was out of the ICU in 5 days and moved to the regular floor. I checked on her every day during rounds. She was gaining strength, her color improving, her energy returning. Natalie was there every time I came by. Derek had gone back to Connecticut for work but visited on weekends. One morning I arrived to find Stella sitting up in bed coloring. She smiled when she saw me. "Dr. Brennan, look, I drew a picture of you." She held up a crayon drawing of a person in a white coat with a heart in their hands. "That's beautiful, Stella. Is that my job? Taking care of hearts?" She nodded enthusiastically. "You fixed my heart. Now I can play outside again." The simple joy in her voice made everything worth it. The 15 years of struggle, the humiliation and rebuilding. All of it had led to this moment where a 6-year-old girl could draw pictures and dream about playing outside. Natalie walked me out of the room when I finished examining Stella. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." We went to a quiet corner of the hallway. She looked nervous. "What is it?" "I was the one who filed the ethics complaint that got you dismissed from your residency." The world seemed to stop. I stared at my sister, not comprehending what she'd just said. "What?" 15 years ago, the anonymous report about you mistreating patients and falsifying records. I made it up. I filed it through the hospital's ethics hotline. It was me. I couldn't breathe. "Why would you do that?" Her voice was shaking. "Because you were always better than me. Smarter, more driven, more talented. I got into a good law school, but you got into an even better medical school. I made good grades, but yours were perfect. Mom and Dad were so proud of you for becoming a doctor. I was jealous. I wanted to be the successful one for once." The betrayal was so profound I couldn't process it. My own sister had destroyed my career out of jealousy. She'd fabricated allegations that made me lose my residency, my reputation, my future. She'd watched me suffer for years and said nothing. "You ruined my life because you were jealous?" My voice came out cold and hard. "You cost me years of my career. You made me start over from nothing. You made me work as a medical assistant making minimum wage while drowning in student loans. You watched me struggle and never said a word." Natalie was crying now. "I know. I know what I did was unforgivable. I tried to convince myself it wasn't that bad, that you'd bounce back, that it was just a setback. But I knew the truth. I destroyed you because I couldn't handle you being more successful than me." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because you saved Stella's life. You operated on her knowing she was my daughter, knowing I'd failed to support you after your residency ended. You didn't have to help us. You could have refused the case, but you saved her anyway. And that made me realize I had to tell you the truth. You deserved to know." I stood there trying to absorb what she'd told me. 15 years. 15 years I'd thought some random person had fabricated lies about me. I'd spent years wondering who hated me enough to destroy my career. And it had been my own sister all along. You need to leave, I said. What? Get out of my hospital. Derek can stay with Stella until she's discharged, but you need to leave. I can't look at you right now. Natalie's face crumpled. Olivia, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't shut me out. You're the only family I have. I was the only family you had 15 years ago, too. That didn't stop you from destroying me. I walked away before she could respond. I went to my office, closed the door, and sat in the dark trying to process everything. My sister had filed the false ethics complaint. She'd invented allegations about patient mistreatment. She'd cost me my residency, my reputation, years of my life. All because she was jealous of my success. The cruelty of it was staggering. Not a random enemy or a disgruntled patient, but my own sister deliberately sabotaging me. And she'd kept the secret for 15 years, letting me believe I'd been wrongfully accused by someone I'd never even know. I thought about all the times I'd questioned myself during those years, wondered if maybe I had done something wrong without realizing it. Maybe I had been too intense or come across wrong to patients. Maybe the accusations weren't completely fabricated. I'd internalized doubt and blame because I couldn't understand why anyone would make up such specific lies. Now I knew. Natalie had made them up because she had access to my patient information through my complaints about residency stress. She'd known enough details to make the allegations sound credible. She'd understood the hospital system well enough to know an anonymous complaint would be taken seriously. She'd weaponized her legal training to destroy my medical career. The next morning, I got a text from Derek. Natalie told me what she did. I'm horrified. I had no idea. Please know I support whatever decision you make about our family relationship. You saved Stella's life regardless of our personal issues, and I'm eternally grateful. At least Derek was decent. That was something. Stella was discharged after 10 days. Her recovery was remarkable. She'd need follow-up appointments and monitoring, but the surgery had been successful. She'd have a chance at a normal childhood now. Derek brought her to my office for her discharge appointment. Natalie wasn't with them. She's staying with her parents for a while, Derek said quietly, giving you space. I examined Stella carefully. Her incision was healing well. Heart function was excellent. All her numbers looked good. You're doing great, Stella. Keep taking your medicines exactly as prescribed. I'll see you again in 1 month to check on everything. She hugged me carefully, mindful of her healing chest. Thank you for fixing my heart, Dr. Brennan. Derek shook my hand. I mean it, Olivia. Thank you for saving her. What Natalie did was unforgivable, but you didn't let that affect Stella's care. That takes incredible strength. After they left, I sat in my office thinking about everything that had happened. Natalie had destroyed my career out of jealousy. Then her daughter had needed the surgeon I'd become through that destruction. The ethical violations complaint had pushed me out of general surgery into pediatric cardiac surgery. Without that forced career change, I never would have developed the expertise to save Stella's life. Natalie's attempt to destroy me had accidentally created the one person who could save her daughter. The irony was almost poetic. I thought about whether I'd ever be able to forgive Natalie. The betrayal was too fundamental, too calculated. She hadn't made an impulsive mistake. She'd deliberately planned and executed my professional destruction, then watched me suffer for years without saying anything. She'd only confessed because I'd saved Stella and guilt had finally overwhelmed her conscience. That wasn't the kind of thing you forgave easily. But I also understood that forgiveness wasn't the point. I'd rebuilt my career despite her sabotage. I'd become a better surgeon than I ever would have been if I'd stayed in general surgery. I'd saved Stella's life not because Natalie deserved my help, but because a 6-year-old child deserved every chance at life. My success wasn't contingent on Natalie's apology or punishment. I'd already won by becoming exceptional despite her attempts to destroy me. 3 months after Stella's surgery, I got a formal letter from the hospital where I'd been dismissed 15 years earlier. The hospital attorney wrote that they'd received new information indicating the ethics complaint filed against me in my residency had been fraudulent. They were issuing a formal apology and clearing my record of any ethics violations. The letter noted that while they couldn't undo the damage to my career, they wanted to acknowledge the injustice and correct my file. Natalie must have come forward to confess what she'd done. It was too late to change anything, but at least the official record now reflected the truth. I filed the letter away and went back to work. I had surgeries scheduled, patients to see, residents to teach. My career wasn't defined by what Natalie had done 15 years ago, or even by her confession now. It was defined by the children I saved, the techniques I perfected, the knowledge I shared with the next generation of surgeons. 5 years later, I'm the chief of pediatric cardiac surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. I've performed over 200 complex cardiac repairs with a success rate that exceeds national averages. I've published extensively, trained fellows from around the world, and consult on cases other surgeons consider impossible. Stella is 11 now, thriving, playing soccer, living the normal childhood her repaired heart allows. Derek sends me updates occasionally, pictures of her at games, report cards with good grades, videos of her laughing with friends. Natalie and I haven't spoken since that day in the hospital hallway. I don't hate her anymore. Hate requires energy I'd rather spend on my patients. But I don't have a relationship with her either. Some betrayals are too profound to rebuild from. She tried to destroy me out of jealousy, and instead she forced me to become extraordinary. That's consequence enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.